So because of that, the Gemara was looking for a makar to find a Tana who holds that a neder is not appropriate, but a nedava is. So the Gemara ended up saying is that both Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, or either one, could learn that a neder is also, but a nedava is allowed. And the type of nedava that's allowed would be a nedava that we know for sure is with his whole heart. So in Reb Meir, the Gemara picked a nazir who made a nazir like Shimon HaTzadik, like the nazir that encountered Shimon HaTzadik. Such a naziris is a true naziris, and that was the fellow who saw that he looked too beautiful and his hair was too beautiful, so he cut his hair. So he made nazir so that he can cut his hair. While in Rabbi Yehuda we learned that there were people who were tzaddikim, talmidei chacham, they so badly wanted to bring.
He had to grow his hair first before he cut it.
Yeah, but I think it was already grown. Like I think when he looked in the mirror, it was grown. Could be it grew an extra month, but I think the whole idea was to be able to cut it at the end. Yeah. Well, on the flip side, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there was these Yidden who wanted to become every mitzvah, and they wanted to make a korban chatas. But the problem is they never did an avera, because in the Kadosh Baruch Hu maybe to call all you them. So in order to find a way to bring a korban chatas, they were noided ben naziris, so they'd have the opportunity to bring a korban chatas.
These tzaddikim didn't do a Avinu Malkeinu on what's his name on Kippur?
Why? What does Avinu Malkeinu do?
Because they didn't do any Ketom.
If you don't do a very, you don't say Avinu Malkeinu.
I'm asking. There's no such thing as doing nowadays. That's why everybody says Avinu Malkeinu. I don't know, something about using.
But could be they didn't do any shogigs. That would be mechayev them a korban chatas.
Maybe they did.
Maybe they were over a various b'shogig that they wouldn't be mechayev them with korban chatas.
And I'm only asking,
right.
It's such a concept that
No, the truth is there was only 5 people who never did Averis. That'd be Yamin, Yishai. Yeah, so they did Averis, but I guess they didn't do Averis chamuras, such as an Aver that would bring them to a korban chatas. Okay, now we have a third sheet of Reb Shimon, not of the whole sugya, just arguing on Rabbi Yehuda that these people who so badly wanted to bring a korban chatas that they made themselves into Nazirim. Rabbi Shimon, that's not what happened. Loi nodru b'nazir. These tzaddikim were not nodru b'nazir. Ella, haroitz alavi oila. If someone wanted to bring an oila, misnadiv and maybe he would bring an oila with an nedava. Shalomim misnadiv and maybe. Toida va'arba minay lachma. The korban toida and the 4 different types of breads that are brought with the korban toida. Misnadiv and maybe. They didn't use Naziris b'nedava to be able to lead them to bring a chatos. Why? They didn't want to be called balei avera. Shenemar, it says by a nazir, v'chibur olav me'asher chata ala nefesh. So you see that it's an avera. So therefore, they decided that they didn't want to come to that, and therefore they did not become Nazirim. So he argued on Rabbi Yehuda, who said they did become Nazirim. I'm not sure, I mean, it's a machlokes what they did. So I guess there was confusion and people didn't remember. Amar Abaye, Shimon HaTzadik, Reb Shimon, Reb Elazar Kafar, Hulan Shita Achasein. They all agree to the same thing, but it's not really the same thing. Not exactly the same thing. There's going to be a slight difference. So let's see what the Ran says. When we see and analyze them, they didn't really all agree on exactly the same thing. According to Reb Shimon, Davka Nazir Tamer is choite. And it's not because there are those who hold that even the Nazir who didn't become Tamer, he's also a choite because he prevented himself from enjoying things in life that he's supposed to. The reason why, according to Shimon HaTzadik, a Nazir would be called a choite is because if he becomes Tameh, Then he has Charoto because it's leading him into a longer Naziris than he had anticipated when he accepted upon his Naziris. Even another Torah is a chote. Like we just learned from Rab Shimon, right? Rab Shimon said that these tzaddikim were not misnadiv v'naziris because they didn't want to be called a chote. So you see that Rab Shimon at least held that just becoming a nazir, even if you don't become tomei, even if you don't end up drinking wine, you're also considered a chote. But miu kulon shavin nika chet nazirs. But everybody agrees that there is some type of avera that's associated with nazirs. So that's the shita achas. Rab Shimon holds dafka by a nazir tomei. Rab Shimon holds even by Rab Shimon who holds even by a nazir Torah, and Shimon HaTzadik who held only by a nazir that became tomei, and Reb Elazar Kappa. So let's see. Shimon HaTzadik, Rab Shimon Hada Amorin. We already learned that Shimon HaTzadik was a story with the nazir who he felt was L'Shem Shemayim. So we see that he held that a regular nazir, he would never eat the carbon, the asham of a nazir tamei, because he felt it wasn't a full-hearted naziris. Rab Shimon Adamaran, he said that tzaddikim would never be misnadiv b'naziris because that itself is considered a chayte. Rab Elazar Kvar, Rabbi, the Tanya we learned. Rab Elazar Kvar, Rabbi Aimer, v'chiber olav me'asher chata ala nefesh. That's what the pasuk says regarding a nazir. Freik the Gemara, or freik the Brisa, freik the Belazar. V'chiber ezay nefesh chata. What averis nefesh did he do? We're talking about even if he didn't become tamei. V'chiber ezay nefesh chata zeh. Ela shetzir atzim min hayayin. His chait is that he prevented himself from enjoying wine that your brother Shalom put into the bria for us to enjoy. V'aloi devarim kal v'chayim. U'mazeh sheloi tzir atzimai. Someone who only prevented himself from drinking wine, that's called a chayte. Someone goes on a diet, alachas kama v'kama, avada is considered a chayte. You know, people who are overweight, they're very big Yeresh Shamayim. They're afraid, chas v'sholem, of approaching even the general area of being a chayte. Nikan kol hayoshev v'tainis nikra chayte. What's wrong? You have to be, no, a person has to enjoy all of the beautiful things. It doesn't mean taivus, because some of the things are mutter. I'm sorry? Yeah, you're supposed to enjoy gashmis. You're not allowed to refrain from gashmis. You know what Moshe mentioned as a tshuva if you're allowed to go on a diet. The big shayla if you're allowed to go on a diet. He holds if it's for your health, avad you're allowed to go on a diet. But it's time to be good, time to look good. It's not so push if you're allowed to go on a diet. Okay. But
somebody who declines stays and women like that, like a guest who comes into somebody's house, give the whole motion. When he comes into the house, and
the Balabas wants to
bring you to bed, give a nice supper, and no, I don't want to eat. What about the bed? No, I'm going to sleep on the floor. What about
the healthy?
I don't wash up. You know, very insulting.
Yeah, so that's the same thing. But Pek Gemara, Hadin Kra, Benaz Atomic, Pek Gemara, but this pasuk is Benaz Atomic. Is this pasuk written by Benaz Atomic? Dr. Gemara, Mishum, I'm sorry, Hadin Kra Mishum Benaz Atomic. The pasuk of the Chibra of Meshachata is referring to Benaz Atomic. So how could you say that there's an aver even for a Nazir Tahir? Dr. Gemara Mishum Deshana Bechetu. When it says the Chibra of Meshachata ala Nefesh, it's because he did two averes, is what the pasuk means. So I did the aver of refraining himself from benefiting the things of the world, and he became tamei. As the Ran says, "Mishum d'shana b'chet shetzir atzmai and v'nitma v'yitura dal nefesh kodesh." It could have said v'chibur alav meshachata. Why did it stick in the al nefesh? Teaches us that there's also a chet that he refrained from enjoying wine that the Torah that the Rebbe gave us. If it's just the word chet, that's just referring to the fact that he became tamei. So there were tamei bilchod havel michtav meshachata v'su loy al nefesh lamali to tell you that there's also a tie on him that he refrained from drinking wine. Okay. Zok to Gemara. My wife always ties that part of the chiyuv of enjoying the Rebbe Shalom's world is you have to travel. You have to go to the Grand Canyon. We have to go to a safari in Africa. I said, you're right. But the Rebbe Shalom put YouTube into the belt. So you can be Yosy with YouTube. Dr. Gemara. Ha'aymer, koinim, koinich, koinis. So now that the Mishnah told us all about the different jodos, now the Mishnah is teaching us, the Tanakh is teaching us the different types of funny words that can be used b'makom carbon. Ha'aymer, koinim, koinich, koinis, harei elu kinuyin l'carbon. These are all kinuyin for the word carbon. Cherek, cherech, cheref, harei elu kinuyin l'cherem. These are all kinuyim for cherem. And the Ran gives us some information here that uva Galil, afilu b'stam osir. In Galil, if someone said harei zeh cherek, without any explanation, it becomes osir for you to have an off from it. The mashma chermei gavoya. Because in Galil, when most people made something cherem, it was cherem gavoya, it was like being makdashit. There was another type of cherem called cherem kahanim, but in Galil people didn't do cherem kahanim, so it was understood when someone said cherem, he meant cherem legavoya. Yehuda dafka b'mefarish, but in Yehuda where cherem could mean lekayin or cherem could mean legavoya, you would have to specify cherem shall be the kabayis. Uchadisa lekaman beperk elu mutarin, which we'll see later on. Niziach, nizik, niziach, piziach. Harei elu kinuyin l'naziris. Shavusa, shekuka, or noider b'mahi. If someone was noider b'mahi, and we'll see what that means in a second. Harei elu kinuyin l'shvua. These are different kinuyim for shvua. Noider b'mahi, harei elu kinuyin shvua. B'mahi, mahi is a kinu l'moshe. It's like mo. Mahi is a kinu l'moshe. So you can't swear in Moshe. Moshe is not a god. So how does that work? The Shavuos Moshe. So it means B'Shavuos Moshe. So if I say I'm making a Shavua, Shavuos Moshe, that's a Shavua. Where do you find that Moshe swore? It says Vayoel Moshe. When Moshe first met Yisrael, the Medrash learns that he made a Shavua not to leave Midian. That's what it says in Yerushalmi. V'haydekamer nodar b'moyu, v'loikamer shavusa shkuka b'moyu. Right? Because if we're saying mohi is a way of making a shvua, it would should say shvua, shvusa, shkuka, b'mohi. Why is it sticking in the word noider b'mohi? If we're explaining what a shvua is here, so that the Gemara is going to explain on Amud Beis. Zoktel Gemara itmar kinuyin, and this is a chazara because the Ran introduced this sugya on the very first day of the Masechta. Kinuyin, where do they come from? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lashon Umoy saying their language that other nations use to describe these activities. And Shimon Lakish Amar Loshen Shabadu Lahem Chachamim Lias Noidabai. They're words that the Chachamim just made up for people to use for Nedarim. V'cheinu Omer, and where do you find such a thing? B'chaydesh Asher Bada Milibai, the month that he made up on his own. Let's see the Ran here. Loshen Numa saying the Karu Karban Bani Lishni. People in other languages would refer to the word carbon, they would use one of these words. They literally made up words. Dilma, okay, that's weiter. The time of my takinu rabbanon kinuyim. Why b'chalal were the rabbanon misak kinuyim? What's wrong with using the normal word of carbon? Why make up a new language? The loylema carbon, because the rabbanon didn't want people to use the word carbon when they were being neither. Carbon. What's the problem? Zaktimar, we're afraid Dilma Omar Carbon Lashem. The person might say Carbon Lashem because that's the Lashon Apostle. So your tongue automatically says Carbon Lashem. What's wrong with that? Velema Carbon Lashem. That's how you donate a carbon. Zaktimar, that would also not be bad. The problem is Dilma Omar Lashem Veloy Omar Carbon. The Kamapik Shem Shemaim Levatal. If you say the word Hashem and you don't say the word carbon, then it would lead to saying Hashem's name in vain. And that's why they said, let's pick a nusach that's not even going to lead you to mention the Shem Hashem at all.
He's not saying Hashem, he's saying Shem Adnos?
Yeah, he's saying Yudke. It's Yudke, well, carbon Hashem is Yudke Vavke. in the pasuk which says Karban Lashem, and Yud Kei
Carbon, Yud Kei Vav Kei.
either that or Lashem. I'm not sure how they pronounce that in those days.
No, they didn't pronounce it.
So it would have been Adnos.
Yeah.
Would have been Adnos. Okay.
Okay.
The Dilma Amar Lashem Lemer Karban, and Mishum Haki Tiknu Koinim. Ki Heicha Delema Koinim B'chut. The Elo Amar Karban Amar Lashem, Kalisha the Cry. It's just going to, his tongue's automatically going to say Karban Lashem because that's the Lashon HaPosuk. Uvecharamim Nami. So why do they make up Kinuyim for Chayrim? That explains Karban. Uvecharam Nami, Avagab de Yehuda Loisagile B'Chayrim B'Chut, Shishtam Charam B'Yehuda. Einam Levet Kabayis, Miyum Amar Chayrim Hu, Amar Lashem. People still use the word Chayrim Lashem. Kedichsiv, like it says in the Pasuk, it says Chayrim Lashem. Avak Yom Chayrech, even the law of Lishon the Crow, since he's not doing the Lashon Pasuk, Lo Haba Amar Lashem El Levet Kabayis. So the Ritva asks Akasha that in Maseches Yuma on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol was Tarif Makalbi, when he stuck his hand into the box to pick the raffle for the seer, he picked up one in his right hand and he said Lashem Chatos. So how come he could say Lashem Chatos? What if he doesn't say Chatos then? So there's 4 terutzim that the Ritva offers. I'm going to see if I remember some of them. One of them is a kohen who's a zoriz, we don't have to make such a worry. A regular Yisrael might slip and say Lashem without saying Chatos, but a kohen is a zoriz. That's one shot.
Same thing in the Parish that day anyway.
The other svara that the Ritva says is this was dictated word for word by the Rebbe Shalom how we should do it. The Rebbe Shalom wanted to do it that way. That was the second shot. Let me think if I can remember the third shot. I can't remember the third or the fourth. But there was another shot that was a very geschmack shot that cannot remember. I cannot remember. So I apologize. I can't remember. Those are two that there was answers. The Tanya we learned. Rab Shimon says, Minayin, how do we know? Shelo yomer Adam, Lashem Oila, or Lashem Mincha, or Lashem Toida. How do you know you shouldn't say the word Lashem first? Or Lashem Shlomim? Talmud Loimer, Karban Lashem. Even when the Torah expresses it, the Torah says the word Karban first. The Kavachomer. Mazeh Shaloi Nischaven Ela Lahasker Shem Shemayim Ala Karban. Madach, somebody who is just trying to make a carbon. It's a legitimate Nusach Shem. The Torah said always put the word carbon before the word Lashem so that we don't have a problem by mistake. Carbon still Amr Torah carbon Lashem. So Levatola, if someone says Hashem's name Levatola, where he's not actually making the carbon, Allah is Kama V'Kama. You see the Chaymer Inyan of using Hashem's name in vain. Let's say that this machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that these are lashonis of the Nachrim, and Rish Lakish, who holds these kinuyim are lashonis shabadu chachamim min libam. Let's say it's totally in the machlokes tonight. Because b'shamay oimrim kinuyin asurim. The kinu of kinuyim would be asur. U'b'sil oimrim kinuyim mutar. The kinu of these kinuyim would be mutar. They don't have any validity. So let's think about this. My love, kinuye kinuyin asurin. Why would the kinuye kinuyin asurin? They're not. If it's lashon shabbat chachamim, the chacham never gave these words any type of validity. But if you hold that it's lashon umais, so then maybe kinuyin is like the slang of the lashon umais, like the Ran told us pshat and kinuyim. Even if it's not a first-class language, even if it's a slang of the language, that's also considered enough of a kinui that it should be chal and nether. So manam kinui knusurin kasaver kinui lashon umaiseh, and therefore even kinuyin takes on validity because there's a segment of the population that uses that word. L'man damar mutarin would hold it Rish Lakish kasaver lashon shabadu lem chachamim. So the kinuyim that the chachamim established are kinuyim. Any other word that comes out of that the chachamim didn't establish wouldn't have any validity. Zakmar loy lav dafter. You could say the chula alma kinuyin lashon umaseh. You can hold that everybody holds that kinuyin is lashon umas. Ulaman damer mutarin kasaver lashon. I'm sorry. V'shamay savri v'shamay holds v'hani nami mishtay umas. The kinuyin are also used by the umas, and therefore they're valid lashonis of nether. Those few people who use it wrong, those words are not valid. So therefore, it's possible that Rabbi Yochanan could agree with Sai Beis Shammai and Sai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai Sabri Gazrinon Kinuyin Kinuyin Mishum Kinuyin. Maybe Beis Shammai, maybe Be'etzem, everyone holds like Rishlokish. That's Lashon Shabbat Chachamim. And really Kinuyin should have no validity at all. But maybe the Rabban are geyser to answer it if you use Kinuyin, because we're afraid if people aren't going to value Nedarim with Kinuyin, they might not even value a nether with a Kinuy, which is a perfect nether. Let's see the Heilig around. Even if the Umais speak this way, it's still not a proper language that would make a nether bichal. There are people who speak even their language incorrectly. It's not a lashon. It's like if you tell somebody, "I want to ask you a question." That's not a right word, right?
That's what they say.
The kaim alone. So that's what they're saying. We still hold if you don't speak your own language properly, it doesn't make it good. The kaim alone Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar lashon umay saying. The kaim alone Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar lashon umay saying. The kaim alone nami. The chinuyin are mutarin. So even though we pass lashon umay, there's a limit to how much we're going to stretch. If you don't even say the lashon umay properly, then it wouldn't work. But you're asking about Yosode. The Ran does say that kinuyin alone you don't need any chiddush for, if it's merely lashon umay. So the Ran says on the first daf, he says even the kinuyin which are lashon umay, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone speaks that way. So a lot of people who speak that way, that'll also be good enough. But we're saying here, kinuyin is something that's completely off. And like there's a lot of words that have become words. Like nowadays, people instead of saying the word "you disrespected me," people say "you dissed me," right? So since a lot of people speak that way, "you dissed me," or a communist or a commie. So I'm not sure at what point it's good enough of a word that's accepted to be chal nader with it, and which one's not. I don't know. For that, you need rabbos.
You gotta look at Webster's. If Webster's accepts.
Webster speaks slang.
Yeah.
They do that?
They don't speak, but they write.
They write it and say this.
So if you look up the word axe, will they say to pose a question to somebody?
It's politically correct.
Oh.
Yeah, there's the question, yeah.
Okay. If
This is a classic argument in linguistics of prescriptivism versus descriptivism.
Uh-huh.
And does a language change over time, or is it that is a language? It's a big debate. So it's interesting that the Gemara takes a position on it. A couple
It'll be
thousand.
very relevant soon. In the next Gemara, it's going to be very, very relevant soon. Let me ask you a question. We have Havara Sefardit and we have Havara Ashkenazit. We know that when the Torah was given, originally everyone spoke the same. So
No, traditions. Every Shaivan had their own.
that's not what Rav Moshe Feinstein says.
That's
Rav
what
Moshe Feinstein said that they spoke of Havara the two Havaras.
So the
Their own what?
language and
Version of what? Havara? They have their own Havara? It's something good because Moshe doesn't say that. So Rav Moshe discusses different Havaras because we're going to see some of the words that we're going to quote mean different if you have a Havara Sfardit or not. And like the Chassidim, he is who, right? A Lutvik says who, a Chuzzi says he. So what does he mean?
It's funny, Yosy, when Chaim Tzvi mentioned Avinu Malkeinu. How can a tzaddik say Avinu Malkeinu? I was thinking the first thing that popped in my mind is, with a Chassidish Havara you have a problem, because if it's Avini Malkeini, then you're saying you sin. But if it's Avinu Malkeinu, then we all sin together. So
Also in Tanakh, there's a quotes a Shevet who spoke with the lisp.
Siboiles.
Siboles and
Shibboleth,
Shiboles,
right.
yes.
whenever they would get angry at each other, they would offer each other a chair, right? They would say, "You're full of sit," right? So if you got angry at somebody, you told them to sit down. Okay, Zog the hele Gemara weiter. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Hey chidami kinuye kinuyim din nedarim. So we've talked about whether or not they're valid nedarim. So what is an example of what the Gemara is talking about? So Zog the Gemara. Tani Rabbi Yosef mi kinamna. No, Tani Rabbi Yosef mi kinamna, mi kenachna, mi kenasna. These are even further away from koinim, koinis. It's mikanachna, mikanamna, mikanasna. These are the words we're talking about.
What's the problem? Doesn't mean I become.
Sorry.
Doesn't
So
mean
it's not enough of a nosa. So there's a machlokes b'sham and b'sil if these words would make a neder.
Doesn't the name by the beginning means I become?
I'm not sure because these are made up words.
Koinim is whatever. Me, I become. By every to do a prefix.
I hear, I hear, but that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says this is kinuyim and telling the machlokes b'sham b'sil. Hey chidami kinuyim decherim. Where do you? What is an example of kinuyim decherim? Tani mafsha. Mafsha is already a name of a person. Tani mafsha taras. It took me a while to chap that this is not one of the kinuyim. Charakim, charafim. Those are instead of chedech, and chedef. It's plural. Those are kinuyim. Kinuyim the naziris. What are those? Tani Rabbi Yosef mechazakna, minazakna, mefichna. Those are kinuyim. Ibayilu. The Gemara is a shayla. What about mifechazana? So it's a little bit enhanced. The word mefichna is mifechizna. It's even further away. Or my mischazna my misazna my. Would these be good? Would these be considered kinuyim? And therefore, would they be considered good nedarim according to Beishamai? My Amalei Ravina Ravashi. Kinma mai. He wanted to know what halacha if you use the word kinma. Is it koinim ka'amar? Does he mean to say koinim and then it would be a kinui which would create an iser? Idilma kinman baisim ka'amar. He's just mentioning the name of a spice, which means he's not really saying anything. So would it have a din of a neder? Amalei Rabacha bridge of Chila Ravashi. Kina mai. What if I use the word kina? Is it kina shel taina goyim ka'amar? Does it just mean like a chicken coop? So on all these shilas of these interesting lashonis, whether or not they're considered kinuyim or not, the Gemara says tiboy. Tiboy means take in the Nedarim language. Let me just look up the Bach because he says over here tiboy perish kamoy take. So I mean that's how you say teku in Nedarim language. Probably tiboy is a kinui of teku. But that's just the kinuyim. Right. Kinuyim the shvua hechidami. What are examples of kinuyim of shvua? Shavuel, shavusiel, shikukael, shavuel. Period. Shikukael. Period. Fact mahagat shavuel be a kinu of shvua. Shavuel is a name. Shavuel ben Gershom mashma. Shavuel ben Gershom. It means Shavuel ben Gershom. I think he's the treasurer in the times of David HaMelech. So it's a name in Navi. So that cannot possibly be a lashon neder. Ela shavuel, shavusil, shkukel. Now. So it could be, but the Gemara wants to know, are these b'chalal val l'shoresh or not? Amar Shmuel said, Amar Ashivsa lo yamar klum. That's not a nusach at all. Ashkika lo yamar klum. Krincha lo amar klum. Or kurnisa is what the orach comes down. So again, these are funny words that are literally made up words, and they don't mean anything. Not
made up. They're really based on a root that is.
They're kinuyim. It's a suffix if they're kinuyim. It's like from koinim. So these funny words, ashivsa comes from shavua, shavuka, shavusa. So ashivsa. It's basically moving further and further away from the right language. Right. I hear it. So we're trying to even on all the kinuyim we want to be matan neder. Even kinuyim, just in case you all the b'sham and build matan. Okay, so now let's see neder b'mayu arei kinuyim. So if you remember, we said that if you made a neder, and you specify like the shavu of Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a kinui that in fact will answer you. And we had Shver the round brought up time. Why does it neder b'mayu? It should have just said b'mayu as another item on the list of shvusa, shvuka, b'mayu. Rather, the Mishnah makes a new phrase out of it, neder b'mayu. Why? So Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer b'mayi. If you said b'mayi, and there's two pshatim in the Ran what this means. The first pshat in the Ran is ha'amar b'mayi. You said shavua instead of saying shavua b'mayi. I'm swearing like Moshe Rabbeinu. You just said b'mayi without the shavua. Lo yomar klum. That wouldn't work. I'm sorry. Say that again.
Is Mohi the king?
Yes. But if you said b'mumsa the amar Mohi, if you said the shvua that Moshe Rabbeinu made, harei elu kinyin l'shvua. So Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is providing clarity to the Mishnah. When the Mishnah said b'mohi, it doesn't mean b'mohi. It means if you used one of the other lashon shvua b'mohi, then it means the shvua of Moshe Rabbeinu. But if you just said the Moshe Rabbeinu, that wouldn't be a good shvua. That's the first shot on the round. The second shot on the round is if you add the bays, if you say b'mohi lo maklum, but if you say mohi without the bays, then it would be a shvua. And the Ran is going to elaborate a little bit on this and explain also why the Mishnah sticks in the word nadar. So let's have a look. Nadar, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Amar Nadar b'mohi lo maklum. The mumsad amar mohi harei elu kinyin l'shvua. This is the kinoi that the Mishnah is referring to, that it'll be a kinoi l'shvua. V'achi perusha. Till Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel lefrushe masnisan asa. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is coming to clarify the Mishnah. The chikatani nadar b'mohi. When the Mishnah says if you're nadar b'mohi, it's a good nadar. Loy de amar b'mohi bilchud. You didn't just say b'mohi. Rather, el de amar b'mumsa de amar mohi. What you said was the shvua that Moshe Rabbeinu said. Kloimer b'shvua shenish b'Moshe k'dichsev ayoel Moshe l'sheves l'sheish. Umishum hachi tanan. And now this explains why the Mishnah, after it gives a list of some items of kinuyim of shvua, then sort of starts a new subject. Nodar b'mohi. Why did it start a new subject of nodar b'mohi? Mishum hachi tanan nodar b'mohi. The ilu amar shvua shkuka b'mohi. If it would have just thrown in b'mohi as another item on the list of kinuyim, like shvua, shkuka, and then b'mohi, without starting a new phrase of saying nodar b'mohi, hayamashma, we would have mistakenly understood the amar b'mohi bilchut. I would have thought that even if you just said the word b'mohi, instead of saying shvua b'mohi, you just said b'mohi, that would have created an isser, which Reb Shimon ben Gamliel tells us quite clearly is not an isser. That's why the Mishnah had to stick in the word neder it's not neder, it's nadar, to say a new case. Nadar b'mohi, if you, in the lashon shavua, you stuck in the word b'mohi, it would be a good shavua. Lashminon, the be'inon sheyaskir nidrei shel Moshe, the hainu shavua. You have to measure the neder of Moshe, which was a shavua. The hainu the ka'amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel ben mumsa, the amar mohi. That's Reb Shimon Gamliel spoke out, that you said b'mumsa the amar mohi, the shavua that Moshe Rabbeinu said. So that's the first pshat in the Ran, that when it says b'mohi in the Mishnah, it means you use that word as part of the phrase. But of course, you stuck in the word shvua, b'mumsa the amar mohi. And the reason why the Mishnah makes it into a separate case is because mohi is different than the earlier two cases, because mohi is just one word in a phrase, but it didn't mention the whole phrase. Ve'is bimumi bimumsa lo yamar klum. If you use the word bays in front of the word mohi, that bays, that extra bays, messes up the shvua. But the mumsa, if you just said the word mumi or the word mumsa, that would be a good shvua. Harei kinuyim shvua. And according to this pshat in the Ran, this will be pshat in the Shimon Gamliel. Also, the ilu omer bebays, if you added a bays before the word mohi, loy have a kinyu l'shvua. That wouldn't be a kinyu l'shvua. V'chitnan b'mumei, and when the Mishnah says nodar b'mohi, loy sheyomer kenim bays, it doesn't mean you were nodar and you said the word b'mohi. It means nodar b'mohi. If you made another with the word moi. You're making the nether and you're saying the word moi itself. So according to this girsa, if moi is a regular lashon shvua, so then it should have just added to the list. Shvua, shvuka, shvuza, moi. Why didn't it do it that way? Rather, the Mishnah stops it and makes a new case out of it. Why would it do that? It's because shvusa and shkuka are like cut out their developments of the word shvua. They come from the word shvua. They're outgrowths of the word shvua. Which is a completely different type of word. That's why the Mishnah separates it from the other ones in the list. Since there are different types of kinuyim, hivstik b'neim b'nodar, the Mishnah makes it sort of into a new case. Right, right. According to this trial, that's how it works. That's what it is. So I mean, right? I hear. So that's stems to the round. That Moimi is a lashon shua in and of itself. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Ha'omer, this is where the Svardish Havar comes in. So Zokter Bach, Ha'omer, and the Dalet sticks in the important word, I believe. Ha'omer, Sham b'Mishneh, Ha'omer, loy chulun shoich. So we're going to soon see if it could just be la. It's with a pasuk. If you say la chulun shoichalach, so the la is touched as a patach, which we say means loy chulun shoichalach. It should not be chulun what I'm eating, or loy kosher shoichalach. It should not be kosher what I'm eating, or veloy dachi. It shouldn't be clean, or tahar. And most of trying to learn it's loy tahar. Just skip that lamed over here. Or you said. So the first set of cases that we just outlined were a mechlal lav at the shemeihin. Loy chulun shoichalach. It should not be chulun what I'm eating. Rather, it should be iser, right? So there's a mechlal lav. We're using the mechlal lav at the shemeihin to create iser. What I'm eating should not be chulun. What should it be? It should be iser. It should not be kosher. I'm sorry. What it should become is not what I'm focusing on. What I'm focusing on is you never said it should be anything. You just said it shouldn't be chulun. So if I'm saying it shouldn't be chulun, it becomes isher b'chlal. So you need the mechlal lav at the shemeihin. You're asking me why doesn't it actually become a carbon? So that's a different child that we'll get into. Now, what if you said a different nusach? You said tomei noiser pigel. So here you actually called it direct isser. This should be tomei. This should be noiser. This should be pigel. Also, that would be a good lashon nether. And now we have a third category of items, ki imra. It should be like a sheep. In other words, like a sheep that's a carbon. Kedidim, like a pen where the sheep are, so like the sheep that are in the pen. Or ke'etim, that are used to burn karbonas. Ke'ishim, or like a fire. Kimizbeach, or kehechel, or kirushalayim. All of these are good l'shoinus of Nedarim, or nadar be'echad mikol misham shemizbeach. This should be like the maslik. It should be like the fork. It should be like the machno. All of these are isurim. Avobishali hisker carbon, even though you didn't mention the word carbon in any of these nesayis. Harezeh nodar becarbon. That's a good nether of carbon. Vidoimer ha'emer Yerushalayim. If you said Yerushalayim, lo yomer klum. And there's a shaila of what Rabbi Yehuda means, and we'll see that in the Gemara.
So back to I'm finishing.
Well, I have to do the round of the Mishnah, but
So what happens here by people? What does he say? This should be people because
the round is going to do split. You're on the Mishnah. You're asking a question on the Mishnah. Yeah. So the Mishnah needs a lot of explanation, and in fact, the round generously provides us with that. So let's go to the round. Kulu b'paschos alamed. They're all with a pasach under the lamed. Karinalu. Also, that's where they're also the mishtamoi. What do they sound like? Loy chulun ela carbon. Loy kosher ela aser. Loy dachi ela aser. The ashkan hachi gabe heter. You find this like gabe heter. Kedaminin. Hey, Yosy ben Yazer al ayil kamta shehu dachen, that's clean. So you see, dachen is tar, but it means it's kosher. It's mutter to eat. So that's why the lashon dachi means mutter to eat. Or kranamic siv called tiber tahira, kaleimer muteris. So you see that the word tahar or the word dachi means mutatit versus an iser achila. Hilchach kiyamar loy kosher v'loy dachi. What does he mean to say? Elo aser ka'amar. He's trying to do a mechalalav at shemei hein. This is not kosher, rather it's aser. V'chitema elo aser mishum iser ka'amar v'loy mishum neder v'hava leike matvis v'davar aser. If I'm saying this shouldn't be kosher, it should be aser. So if I'm saying it should be aser, I'm not being matvis in a carbon, right? Remember we said that if you want to be matvis, when you make a neder, you want to say this should be like that, that has to be something that you also are menativ, right? So that's why you can make it into a carbon. But you can't say this should be like chazer, because chazer is an isser that you didn't make. And that doesn't work for Nedarim. So how does this work for Nedarim? If I said it shouldn't be kosher or aser, aser doesn't necessarily mean a carbon. So how does that work? And it wouldn't be aser. There's two ways to say what I'm referring to. I said ela aser. I might be referring to an isser that you cannot be matfis, like chazer, or I might be referring to an isser that it could be matfis, like a carbon. The halacha is as linan lechumra the kaimel on stam nedarim lahachmer. When you have a subject, what I mean, you go lahachmer. Tar tamei pigel noiser aser. So now we're going to address Akiva's question. Kachi agirsa b'nuschois. This is the girsa, the kosher be'enai, but I have it very shver. My ike ben tar her l'dachi. Why would the Mishnah list off the word loy dachi and loy tar? Dachi means tar. So why is the Mishnah repeating the same word twice? The chiv in the Tana l'dachi v'lamed michlal the beloy lamed loy mitzer. If you didn't say la dachi, you just said dachi. That's not a lashon of iser. That's a lashon of heter. The chiv in shekain hiyamar tar beloy lamed. If you say tar without the lamed, because the way our Mishnah quotes the tar, there's no lamed there. Lama yeser. Why should it be aser? V'alei dachi targume shel tar. Dachi is the taich of targum. It's the same word. And by dachi, you have to say la dachi. So how come by Torah the Mishnah doesn't quote the letter lamed? Because of tar belamed, the tame. So he actually is gurish the Mishnah difference. He says la tar, so that even though it doesn't say la tar in the Mishnah, he connects it to the previous shtickle that it's la tar. And the tame pigel benoisar is beloy lamed. The chein nearly ikar. That's what I think is pshat. The garsin lachi b'maslisin la tar belamed. If you actually gurish that way, nicha, it makes much more sense. The loy garsin lay, and if you're not gurish it, nearly mishum the tana lamed bedachi loy chashlim and snayi betar. Even if you're not garishing in the Mishnah the lamed, we'll say the Tana didn't say it because the Tana figured you'd figure it out from the Torah. The mill said the pshiti, the dachi, the tar, shabila dadi. It's pasha. They're exactly the same. The chadijanahu. The Tana b'maslisin plus dini. Now here's the important part. The Ran is telling us there's three different types of halachas of isur neder that the Tana is telling us in this Mishnah. The Tana b'maslisin plus dini tani. A the halacha shumasker shein shemash musa leheter. Anytime you compare something to something that has a lashon heter, like lachulin, la kosher, tzarich sheyasker b'tchilasei lamed b'pasach. You have to start it with the word lamed in the pasach, which will tell us it means loy tahor. Umitzar, and therefore it'll be also the michlal lav ato shemeyahein. Behainu chulin kosher, dechita dachi tar. These are all chulin kosher, dachi tar are four expressions of kashrus. Okay, so that's the first halacha. That if you want to compare it to something that's kosher, if you say la, so then you have the michlal lav ato shemeyahein because you're saying this is loy kosher, loy tahor. Now we're up to the second set of items, which is Akiva's question. Then we have what if you're actually using an item that is isser in and of itself, like pigel, the shaykh bekachim, and it's an isser that is relevant to kachim, even though you cannot make pigel, but you could make kachim, and kachim could become pigel. To go in tame pigel noiser uvahani lo shaykh halamet psucha betchilasim. They don't need a lamed because you're not saying that this item should not be like them. You're actually saying this item should be like them. The other rabba, if I said loy pigel, then obviously I'm saying it shouldn't be pigel, rather it should be heter. So here you don't use the lamed, you just say pigel it should be. What if you didn't say this should be kip pigel? I just said pigel. I didn't have the chafadimin. Mitzri, it's usher even without the chafadimin. The Gemara mukmil masisik rabiuda kula. Vafilu hachi V'hani also b'loichav. All of these cases, as the mission doesn't say a chafadimin, he just says pigel noiser. So that would be enough to create an isser. Shekivin sheshmoi moira aser b'loichav. I'm sorry, aser moira aser. Since the name itself is radiating isser, b'loichav nami mitzer l'chulam. Everybody would agree that it's going to be aser. Avagav the metzina lamemer. Even though you could possibly argue the chi'amar tamei atruma kamachavin. Maybe when he said tamei, he meant truma. The shaykh ba nami tuma v'tahira. So maybe he's not even referring to kachim. Maybe he's referring to truma, and then your neder would mean nothing because that's not a davar neither, and therefore your matmas davar aser wouldn't be any neder at all. The truma nami aval davar aser. The chimatmas ba loy sesar could have been gemara. It wouldn't work at all. Afilohachi, we're going back to the same surah. The chiva and the ikal of meimar nami lekachim kamachavin habalek istam nedarim lahach. When you say tamei, you might be referring to kachim that are tamei, which would create an isser, or you might be referring to truma that became tamei, where that's isser that wouldn't create a nether at all. But once again, you say stam nedarim lahachmer. Well, Hadatani, then the third category of items that are discussed in the Mishnah are ki imra, ki dirim, ki eitzim. Why do you need a chafadim in here? Because these don't show clearly isser like the last category. The hanikuli ain't shemon moira al shem isser. The name imra, I just said a sheep. The word sheep doesn't automatically say isser. That's Rabbi Yehuda, who the Gemara says our Mishnah according to Rabbi Yehuda says you have to say that chav because that shows you're trying to create isser. The Eloi le mashma damer aser, it wouldn't have the mashmoyis that you're trying to create isser. Mashenkin be pickle v'noisar, by pickle and noisar, which are be'etzem aser, even to shmon al shem isser, harei yikamer ki pickle k'noisar, even if he didn't have the chav. So those are the three different categories of nedarim that the Mishnah discusses. So Kiva, what were you asking about pickle?
So I guess that answered it. A pickle is a reality, right? Or it is or it isn't. I can't make something into pickle that it is.
Right. So that for that the Brown says you're right, but what made it a carbon that you did do, so that's enough. That pickle is not considered a davar ha'aser, it's considered a davar ha'noder. Because it only could come to pickle if you first are noider and make that animal into a carbon.
So
unlike chazer, where you have no control over it.
right. So this one, since you had control, so it could have been.
That's enough that you could be matbis in it, and it's not called matbis with davar ha'aser. So there's the three categories. The loy chulin is the one, Isser alone, you don't need a chafadimin, and if something is not mamish Isser, like imra, dira, eitim, those need the chafadimin.
Yeah,
But that's the same reason that was Imre, weil das can be nakar, the same reason as the noise, no? The tak aus the gedacht was in
Yeah, but the imra, pickle, the name is Isser. Imra, it just means a shepsel. Nishay the shepsel is Isser.
Right?
It's not right.
But the Isser that the imra has to have cannot be an Isser of chazer, it has to be an Isser of korban.
Right. So I was on the kedid and the ishim, the other that, that's an ochet, the carbon.
That's right. So that's why all of them work. All of them are good l'shon another. But you have to have the chavadimim. All the Ran is saying is that the Mishnah is teaching us for that you need the chavadimim. You have to say ki'eshim, kidir. Pigel, you can say pigel, right? Pigel noshim, because pigel noshim is be'etzem user. The name shreit iser.
Right.
In Ruchel, the name is shreit iser. I know Chemayin a carbon, and that's iser, but it's not as often, and that's why you need the chavadimim.
But once a tar doesn't belong in that category, that's my issue too. Because you have tar, tamei.
I just want to tell the audience that Motzei Shabbos we're going to learn at 8:00, and we learn here. If anybody is interested, we're going to be learning here because Shlomi Feintach said we should learn here in the Bismanders. So Motzei Shabbos we're going to learn here. We're also learning. Where was I last week? What happened last week? I said, no, I came here last week.
Oh.
I came here. But what happened was it was a very short block. So it could be by the time you came, I was gone already. Yeah, but no, we learned here. And on Shabbos, we're going to learn before Mincha still. Okay,
No, they have